Chapter 51. Seth's Visit. Seth was waiting outside the big blue-tinted doors the next morning when Evan arrived. It was quite warm in the April sunshine. Buds were swelling on many trees. Daffodils were making an appearance, and the air smelled of hyacinth. As Evan walked through the Canadian deciduous forest towards the doors, a little worm dropped onto his coat as he passed underneath a pussy willow tree. Flicking it to the ground, Evan thought, "Figures. New buds just start emerging and the insects are ready to devour." "Hey, what's up?" he asked Seth as he drew closer. "Aren't you working for the summer?" "I don't have to be at work till 9, Seth explained, "and I'm working right around the corner." "Right," Evan recalled, remembering that Seth was working at the Blue Moon Garden Shop. "Have you asked the professor if university students can see paradise?" the redhead asked hopefully. Evan hadn't asked the question yet. His last conversation with Jax hadn't gone so well, and he knew the professor was busy with all the scientists. "Well, it's not really open to the public just yet," he stalled. Seth nodded. "But don't you think Greenville science students should have the opportunity to view paradise before the public?" Evan laughed. More than anything, he longed to show the tinies to Seth. "You've got a point," he smiled. "I'll tell you what. I'll ask the professor if I can take you in at 8 tonight for a private showing. All the scientists will be gone by then, but you'd have to keep it top secret. We can't give every science student a personal tour, not just yet." "That would be fantastic," Seth exclaimed. "I won't say a word." When Evan's message came through at 6, begging to take Seth on a top-secret tour at 8, the professor frowned. He had no desire to do Seth a favor, but he could hardly deny Evan. As much as he was upset with Evan's new views, he knew he could not manage paradise without him. However, after another full day of answering challenging questions and downplaying Odin and Ponzi's exaggerated complaints when the solar ovens were placed on the train, he was eager to get home to some peace and quiet. "Whatever you want," he texted tersely. "I'm heading home." Seth met Evan outside the rainforest entrance. Using his keycard, Evan opened the doors and led his friend to the viewing hall. Sliding his card through the reader once again, the door pulled open and they walked inside. A big, bright banner greeted them. "Happy human life in an ideal world" was the slogan. Seth raised his eyebrows. Before they reached the windows, Seth noticed the building board housing display. "Nice work," he said. "These were made by the tinies during the first 4 months they lived in paradise," Evan told him. "Wow, they can build houses?" Seth pointed to one structure with a veranda and decorative trim on the eaves and windows. "I really like that one," he said. "That house belonged to Zahir and Milan. They put a lot of effort into building it." Motioning for Seth to join him, Evan took him to the large window where they could look into the northern end of the enormous domed terrarium. Since it was still light outside, the sun's setting rays came through the glass greenhouse walls into the paradise room, fully illuminating the dome and even the viewing hall. "Oh, this is so cool," Seth raved. "I can see them. Wow, they are racing down that hill like maniacs." "Let's hope not," Evan said dryly. Loud shouts came through the overhead speakers. With a smile of delight, Seth marveled, "I can hear their voices." "Yes, you can. This is their fun hour. All the schooling is done in the morning. Some of them work on enjoyable activities in the afternoon, but after dinner, they usually just have fun." For a few minutes, Seth watched in fascination. "Those dogs have endless energy," he commented, seeing Emma and Rusty chasing the go-karts up and down the hill. Then he asked, "Who is who? What are all the tinies' names?" He pointed. "Who are the black couple racing down in the purple cart?" "That's Lima and Santa," Evan told him. "They surf, dance, and sing, and do a lot of work in the gardens." Right behind the purple cart was a blue one. "Zahir is the dark-haired guy in the go-kart behind them," he explained. "The blonde girl with him is Georgia. They're also very musical." One by one, Evan named the tinies. "Oh, I see a girl coming up from that building," Seth remarked, looking toward the store. "That's Amy," Evan told him. "Looks like she's finished cleaning up and is heading to the hill." They watched Amy push a carry cart of food scraps, pellets, and kibble to the hill close by the lake. "Amy feeds the animals every evening," Evan told him. "She lives up there on Rainbow Hill with 4 other girls in the big house that you can see." Evan pointed to all the hills and houses, telling Seth who lived where and what they liked to do. Suddenly Seth saw a small object fly up over the forest. He heard a splat. "What's going going on?" he asked. Moving closer, they peered down into the forest. Sawed-off trees and a target practice area had been set up in a small clearing. Evan noticed the piles of dirt had increased and wondered to himself, "It's so strange the carry carts are always on the far side of the forest. Are they digging a hole over there?" "Hey, it's a regular shooting range," Seth laughed. Evan nodded. "Who are those two?" Seth inquired, pointing to the tinies who were loading up the catapult for another round. "Franz and Odom are making the compost collides," Evan informed him with a wry smile. "Usually Ponzi is with them. I'm not sure where he is. Do you see a bronze-colored, medium-built fellow with messy brown hair anywhere?" "Is he sitting in the tree with that small girl?" Evan scanned the forest, and sure enough, Ponzi was just out of sight at the target practice area, sitting in a tree with Lily. "Yep, that's him." "How old are these tinies?" Seth asked. "Well, every month for them is a year to us. They age and learn quickly, so they are about 18. Seth nodded. "I love the multiracial aspect. It's beautiful." "Yes, Professor Lemans did his best to include most nationalities. Lima looks Ethiopian. Franz is European." "European? Is he German or French or—" "I don't know the specifics on any of them, actually," Evan replied. "It's just our best guess. We asked for multiracial genetic material from the donor bank, and we were sent a selection. The professor believes Louis and Amy are European. Zahir, he says, is most likely Middle Eastern. Vahid looks Persian. Damien, I'd guess Russian. Odin, Scandinavian. Yuyan is definitely Asian. Santa is possibly Caribbean. Dia and Vanitha look Indian or Pakistani. And I believe the rest are Canadian combinations of some sort or another." Seth nodded thoughtfully. As the sun set, the tinies began to head home. Evan pointed to the older man walking down the hill with a dusky young lady who was wearing a purple sundress that glittered even in the dim lighting. Dia was waving her arms in a dramatic fashion. "Uncle Louis is the older gentleman," Evan said. "He was created about 4 human years before any of the others. You can see he's aging quickly. He's nearly 65 in our time frame." "Created?" Seth questioned. "Well, no, I mean he was, well, experimentally born." Pondering the situation, Seth burst out, "Has anyone told the tinies about God or Jesus Christ?" The professor would never allow that. "So they might live for another 5 or 6 years, our time, and then that's it?" the redhead asked with dismay. They heard the tinies saying goodnight to each other as they headed home to their dark houses. "If you were one of the tinies," Seth prodded, "wouldn't you want to know about living forever in a world that's no longer cursed? Or would 10 years in paradise be sufficient?" With a deep sigh, Evan ran his hand over the stubble on his chin. "I would like the opportunity to consider all my options," he admitted. "But how can we do that without angering the professor? He's already upset with me for telling him about God's view of human nature. Even Louis wouldn't be on our side. He's read the professor's book. Could we send in a tiny Bible? I have one at home. It's only 6 centimeters tall." "That's tiny," Evan agreed. He shrugged reluctantly. "Sure, I guess I could put it on the train," he pondered, running his fingers through his thick blonde hair and making it all stick up on end. Then he shook his head. "But the professor would see it or hear about it eventually. He would know I had done it. I'm sure that would be the end of our relationship. It's already tentative." Shaking his head decisively, Evan added, "This isn't my project, Seth. Sending in a Bible could turn the tinies' world upside down and radically change their perspectives. I'm sure that right now most of them see the professor as their God." "If I could think of a plan that wouldn't jeopardize your relationship with him, would you consider it?" Seth asked. "Perhaps," Evan sighed, feeling deeply conflicted. Twilight had descended on Paradise, and the hallway was dark. Only running lights lit up the floor and ceiling. The show was over. Turning on his cell phone flashlight, Evan began to walk toward the door. "I really appreciate you allowing me this visit," Seth said. "You're welcome," Evan replied wearily. "Are you okay?" "Oh, sure. Other than feeling like you just asked if I wanted to be a missionary to North Korea, I feel fine." Seth laughed. "Losing your job is almost as bad as losing your life." Okay, so it's not quite that bad, Evan chuckled. But it just seems like an impossible mission with very big risks. And I'm still not fully convinced the message is true. Nodding his head thoughtfully, Seth agreed. I'm sorry, Evan, he apologized sincerely. No one is willing to put their job or their life on the line if they aren't fully convinced of the cause. Placing his hand on Evan's shoulder, he said, Let's pray for you and the professor and all the tinies. If it's the Lord's will, I pray we may all receive some direction. Standing together in the mirrored hallway, the two young men prayed earnestly to their Heavenly Father for guidance. Little did they know that Louis's search was already well underway. Chapter 52. Smoke. It was the third day of the scientific viewing. Another new group had arrived from Japan and China, and the professor was once again fielding comments and questions. Not only that, but after intense pressure and numerous phone calls, he had granted permission for one television reporter to attend. All the solar ovens were lined up outside of Paradise on the display table in the viewing hall, right next to the building board homes. Several colored ribbons had been sent in as rewards for the finalists. Every group had received a ribbon in one category or another, so that no one would feel left out. Odin and Ponzi were under Uncle Louis's watchful eye. Now that he was aware that Paradise was under such intense scrutiny, he was trying to ensure the tinies wouldn't have time to complain near the microphones or cause any more trouble. Professor Lemans had sent in a beautifully illustrated book on flight for Louis's school lessons. For the hands-on activity that day, he had also sent in supplies and instructions for paragliding. It was a bit risky, but he hoped this exciting project would take the tinies several weeks to build, distracting the troublemakers from any more dangerous experimentation. Allow Odin and Ponzi to take the day off from patio construction, he had included in the message, as long as they stay in their groups building a paraglider. Jax had also encouraged Louis to gather all the musicians together that morning and make the fun song about a day in paradise, texting, "Such a song would be so special for the upcoming thank you celebration." All was going well, and the 19 Asian scientists were very impressed by the keen interest the students had in the lesson. After reading a chapter from the book about flight, everyone was eager to make the gliders, even though the instructions were rather complicated. Uncle Louis was a little challenged trying to read and explain the detailed instructions while keeping a watchful eye on Odin's group. When Uncle Louis dismissed the musicians to create a new song, there were two interesting activities for the scientists to observe: the glider construction and the musical challenge. Without even acknowledging Amy's presence, Georgia took charge and played a tune that she and Zahir had already composed. It was good, but then Vahid and Kenzie added some shake and clang, and the tune became catchy. Amy, who still hadn't come to terms with her angry outbursts and broken relationships, didn't have much to contribute and slunk back to the science project. Kenzie dutifully suggested some words for the melody, which Zahir half-heartedly rearranged, while Santa, Lima, Vinitha, and Damien made up a dance. After a while, a funny little song about day-to-day life in paradise began to emerge. The professor smiled when all the scientists clapped in the viewing room. But he knew the results would have been much better if Amy and Zahir had put in a full effort. Sadly, they didn't seem to be interacting at all. Once again, his attempts to push them together had failed. Quietly, the professor reflected on the French psychologist's remarks. "Unhelpful thoughts lower our moods and lead to unhelpful behaviors," she had explained. There was no doubt that some were regretting their behaviors, which was in turn affecting their moods. Thankfully, the group of scientists from Japan and China were very pleased with what they saw. They loved the mostly happy world, with creativity, diligence, and invigorating projects, and the teams who worked well together. Aside from a few forlorn faces, it was the world the professor wanted to show, and he was thankful that the TV reporter was filming today's events rather than the two before. The musicians returned to work on the paragliding kits, and Santa and Lima continued singing catchy phrases from the new song. As Uncle Louis shared a few important details with the newcomers that he had figured out with the others, Odin asked to use the outhouse. Uncle Louis didn't notice Ponzi and Franz slip away with him. "He's such a wonderful teacher," a female Japanese scientist acknowledged in the viewing hall. "He has such a lovely, patient demeanor." "Yes," another female scientist agreed. "How wonderful for all these youths to be raised in such a stimulating environment with a kind, intelligent teacher. I love STEAM learning." A male scientist nodded politely. "Developing a paraglider from scratch with the impetus for personal flight is a great motivator for all their hard work and effort." Listening happily to the complimentary remarks, the professor wasn't looking when 3 young men ran off across the field to the outhouse. He didn't see Odin, Ponzi, and Franz dash in behind Cascading Mountain or notice they had reached the North Forest. However, the professor did observe Odin come out of his den with a confiscated sheet of foil, and he was horrified. "Sailors! He's got a sheet of foil," he thought. "He must have taken it before Louis loaded up the train." "Excuse me one moment," the professor said politely to his guests. "Would anyone like a hot drink? I think it might be time for some refreshment." They had been watching for nearly 2 hours. Everyone was happy to take a break and get a drink from the Reptile Café. The professor quickly slipped away to the washroom. He was desperate to get in touch with Louis, but he knew that Louis was unlikely to check his phone while working with all the tinies. "But maybe he'll need to find some further instructions on Google," he told himself desperately. "I'll send him a message and just hope that he gets it." "Louis," he texted in the privacy of the men's washroom, "Odin has foil. He may be intending to make fire now or sometime later in the week. You have to get it back. It's a full sheet." Once all 19 scientists had enjoyed a hot drink at the cafe, they were happy to follow the professor back to the viewing hall. Many were making pleasant comments about his research and the beautiful biomes he had helped design in the biosphere. With a fixed smile, he held the door open for everyone. He graciously acknowledged all the remarks and answered their questions. But all the time, he was desperately hoping that if Odin tried to use a foil, Louis would notice and take it away. He was very anxious to see what was happening. Taking his place by the viewing window with all the scientists, the professor saw that Louis was still explaining instructions to the tinies who had made up the song. Hastily, he scanned the landscape, looking for Odin and Ponzi. They weren't on Mining Hill, and they weren't near the store. They weren't in any open area. And then he saw smoke. It was coming up in the North Forest, where so much dry, dead debris lay. Swallowing hard, Professor Lemann's hands began to tremble. Hardly hearing the questions that were being asked of him, he made his way over in the direction of the smoke and pressed his face close to the edge of the window. Odin, Franz, and Ponzi had started a fire and were dragging over dead branches from the discarded treetops. "Oh la la, this could destroy everything," he thought, breathing rapidly. He deliberated how he might get Louis's attention. Louis would never hear the phone ring inside the cave. They had insulated the walls well to avoid anything being overheard. "I could run into the office and bang on the glass dome," he thought. "But would any of them get the message, or would they just be scared?" Turning to the crowd of scientists, the professor smiled and said, "How foolish of me. I forgot to tell you that you are all entitled to a complimentary dessert. If you'd like to enjoy one of our fabulous cheesecakes or homemade ice cream, you may head back to the cafe. Just tell them that it's on me." "Oh, how lovely," several scientists replied. Most took the offer. But to the professor's dismay, the TV reporter did not. As the scientists exited the hall, the professor heard a distant beeping sound coming from his office. A flashing red light caught his attention. His phone began to vibrate. When the rain began to fall inside the dome, Louis looked up and spotted the smoke. "I'm just going to head into my office for a moment," the professor told the reporter. "I'll be gone for a few minutes. Feel free to enjoy yourself in the cafe." With his camera pointed toward the smoke, the TV reporter declined. "I'm not a dessert person. I'll wait here." The professor's heart sunk. A fire in paradise would make the news headlines. But there was no time to lose. Hastily, he strode to the locked door in the viewing hall. Punching in the code, he let himself in and then darted through the corridors, the elevator entrances, and into the paradise room. First, he checked that the Rainmaker was following emergency protocol. Just as it was programmed to do, rain was falling hard in a half cycle back and forth over the area where the smoke had been detected. He raced to the main computer to fiddle with the controls. Immediately, he reduced the oxygen levels and set the vents to exhaust the smoke. Changing the atmospheric conditions could be detrimental for the tinies if it was prolonged, but if the fire got out of control, his whole experiment could be tragically over in minutes. Darting back to the dome, he checked the water fountains positioned all around the perimeter and was pleased to see they were spraying at full volume. A lot of water would be needed to put out the fires which were now blazing from one treetop to the next. Once he had ensured their emergency response was well underway, the professor sent a hasty message through to Evan just in case he wasn't already receiving the alert. "Please come immediately. We have a fire." Chapter 53. Beyond Servant Leadership. When the rain began to fall, Louis looked up right away, puzzled. It only took him a second to spot the smoke. By then, the flames were also visible above the trees, and thick gray plumes were rising into the air. "Fire!" Uncle Louis called out fearfully. Everyone turned to look, but not all understood the immediate danger. Most had never seen fire before. However, they were unnerved by the heavy rain that was falling from above. The distant beeping sound reminded many of the flood. Not only was the foliage blazing, but many dead treetops lay on the ground. Dry and brittle, Louis knew they would burn easily. Uncertain that the rain would be enough to fight the rapidly spreading flames, Uncle Louis ordered everyone to grab one of Anita's pots as quickly as possible. "Fill them up at the lake and get water to the woods as fast as you can. Fight the ground fire." The dogs began barking at the strange sounds and smells. Brownie started mooing frantically. Dazed, but trying to think quickly, Uncle Louis redirected some of the strong young men. "Zahir, Kenzie, Damien, and Lima," he yelled. "Head to the tap at the store. Take some of those pots and get water to the fire as quickly as you can." Sensing Uncle Louis's concern, the 4 young men fled into the kitchen. Everyone else dashed to the creative shop, took a pot, and ran to the lake. Uncle Louis saw Amy's carry cart next to the garden. He felt it would help him carry pots of water. He tried to run, but he had been struggling to run lately. Huffing and puffing, he shuffled over. He wondered if the professor knew what was happening, or if the rain was only an automatic response. Seizing the cart, he looked up to the sky and prayed anxiously, "Oh God, if you are real, please may this not be the end. Please help us fight this fire and save everyone's life. Please give us all more time. Please, please help us." Struggling to the store with the cart, he watched the 4 young men scurry back and forth with water. Uncle Louis thought about what he had learned. Having finished the first 3 gospel accounts in the last couple of nights, he was well into the book of John. He now knew that whatever accusations the professor had leveled against God, this God claimed he had power to create life and give life back again. If the Bible record was true, God had even demonstrated his power and provided the evidence. His son Jesus had willingly given his life to save the world, and God had resurrected him from the dead. As Louis endeavored to push the cart back to the store, he assured himself that not only had God given his son life again, but God had given him a much better life. Jesus had been given eternal life, and he would never, ever die again. And the Son promised he would give this life to others. Just before dawn that morning, Louis had finished the chapter where Jesus says to Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." Stumbling up to the store, Louis silently pleaded for more time to investigate. He wanted to prove whether or not the Bible was true. The professor had been adamant that the Bible was false, but Louis knew from his weeks of investigation that many online articles argued the opposite. There was so much more he wanted to read. If it was true, then there was so much that he wanted to share. Kenzie came running out of the store with a pot of water, and Uncle Louis told him to put it in the cart. "I can carry it," Kenzie pleaded. I want to help, Uncle Louis begged. Please go back and get another. With no time to argue, Kenzie complied. Anxiously, Uncle Louis shuffled over to the forest, pushing the pot of water as fast as he could. The heat was intense. 3 young men were ahead of him, dashing to the inferno with full pots of water from the store. Kenzie came running out with his second pot. The distressed dogs were circling back and forth and getting in the way. The sheep were bleating, the chickens cackling, and every moment the fire seemed to be spreading. Trees were engulfed in flames. Smoke was pouring into the air. The rain seemed to have little effect. Terrified by the new, fierce, destructive power, Uncle Louis tried to dump his pot on a blazing branch, but missed. The fire was so hot it was hard to get close. He wondered how long it would take to get it under control, and if the fountains of water were spraying out behind the forest, just like they had in the flood. Back and forth the strong young men ran, bravely hurling water from their pots against the dry, crackling treetops burning on the ground. Soon the others made it all the way back from the lake with their contributions. Keep it coming, Uncle Louis encouraged, wheeling the cart back to the store. Go as fast as you can. He saw Odin, France, and Ponzi run to the tracks. Get some water and help us, he urged angrily. We have a better idea, Odin yelled back. We'll either get us out of here or we'll force the professor to let us out. No, Uncle Louis yelled. You have no idea what you're saying. You can't live out there. You'll die. The professor and Evan lived just fine, Odin contended. Uncle Louis was fully exasperated. They don't need high oxygen like we do, you foolish idiots, he yelled, repeating the message he had given to them many times with a much harsher adjective attached. The troublemakers looked up in surprise. Why don't you trust me? The older man raged. Leaving paradise will kill you. You have to fight this fire with us. This is the only option we have. Odin tried to move a lever on the tracks, but nothing happened. With a log, France and Ponzi tried to smash open the gated doors in the train tunnel, but with no success. Come on, Professor! Odin hollered toward the hazy glass with his fist in the air. Let us out of here or we'll all die! Open the door! Save your tinies! The 3 troublemakers tried a few more times to break down the gate before realizing their scheme would not work. The wood had no effect on the metal. Suddenly, Odin's cabin caught fire and began to burn even more quickly than the trees. Realizing their own homes could be destroyed, the instigators hurried over to contain the blaze. Between the steady rain and the small dumps of water from the pots, the fire began to slow down a little. Eventually, Odin, France, and Ponzi extinguished the cabin fire, with one wall still left intact. Uncle Louis was pushing himself to bring another pot, but he was wearing out. He stooped over to catch his breath. Zahir ran over to him. Don't worry about me, Uncle Louis panted heavily. Just put out the fire, or we'll all be in trouble. I'll be okay. Insisting that Uncle Louis rest, Zahir took his arm to help him sit down near the store. With a painful expression on his face, Uncle Louis collapsed on the ground, knocking his carry cart and spilling the water all over himself. He was breathing hard. Take charge, Zahir, he begged. Please take charge. The pain on the left side of Louis's chest was increasing as Zahir ensured he was sitting comfortably. He felt helpless and weak, but his new hope was growing stronger. It was infinitely stronger than the hope that the professor might one day figure out how to give back a few more years of life. The old hope seemed so dismal in comparison to the new. But if the Bible is true, he pleaded silently, then I must tell the other tinies. Please, Father in heaven, help us fight this. We all need more time. A large group arrived with water from the lake. The beach boys took the pots from their hands and sprinted to the flaming forest. Zahir stood up and looked around. Take this water, Nancy shouted to him, appearing in the doorway with a large pot in her hands. Zahir took charge. Make a line to pass the water from the store, he directed all the tinies, before they could head back to the lake. It will be faster this way. Hastily, he told everyone where to stand and demonstrated how he wanted them to pass the water from one to the other and then reach back for the next. Kenzie and Vahid, he yelled out, Go into the store and help Nancy fill pots of water and pass them to everyone outside. Don't stop till the fire is out." Kenzie and Vahid ran into the store to help Nancy. Taking the first full pot that came down the line from the new water brigade, Zahir darted toward the burning forest. Odin, France, and Ponzi were fiddling once more with the train tracks. Zahir hollered for them to help. Only Ponzi responded, running over to grab the next pot. The Beach Boys caught on to the new system, and it began to work well. The fire had burned down the trees that had once blocked the target practice area from view. Close up to the front lines of action, Amy continued to pass pots from Santa to Lily, Lily to Tina, Tina to whoever grabbed it from her hands. In the flurry of action, Amy saw flames leap up from the dead treetops around Odin's tall catapult. She saw the tall structure begin to waver. Even closer to the flames, Zahir and the Beach Boys were heaving water on the fire that was still blazing along the ground. Amy reached back for another pot. When she turned to pass it to Lily, she cast a worried glance toward Odin's contraption. It was leaning heavily to one side. Ponzi grabbed a pot from Tina and ran over to toss water against the fiery base. Suddenly, the whole thing toppled over. With a mighty crash, it hit the ground, knocking the young man down and trapping him underneath. Everyone heard Ponzi cry out in pain. Amy could see his arms and legs thrashing as he desperately tried to free himself. She heard Zahir yell out in horror, "No! No!" Lily became hysterical and paralyzed by fear. Large flames were spreading along the fallen catapult tower, reaching out for the bronze-skinned youth. Several girls screamed and froze in action. As if in slow motion, Amy saw Zahir turn to Damien and Lima, who were heaving water against the burning treetops. "We've got to help him," he pleaded. Ponzi was nearly surrounded by a fast-moving inferno. Everyone could see that helping him might entail serious burns to themselves. "No way," Damien yelled back. "Ponzi started this fire. I'm not risking my life for him." "Come on, guys," Zahir begged earnestly. "We can't leave him to burn. Help me." Fearfully, Georgia screamed, "Don't you go in there, Zahir. It's too dangerous. You'll get burned. Stay out." "He deserves whatever he gets," Damien argued, running to take another pot to drench the blaze. "I'll fight for everyone else." Ponzi screamed in terror as the flames leaped closer. He tried again to wriggle out from under the heavy beam. Lima dashed toward the frantic captive, trying to cast his water toward the raging fire, but he didn't get close enough. Lily couldn't stop screaming. Amy longed to help Zahir, but she was petrified of the hot, crackling fire. She knew how painful small burns could be. "Please help Zahir, someone!" she called out tearfully. "Please help him save Ponzi." Uncle Louis was appalled that no one else would assist. While Zahir was a strong young man, it was unlikely he could lift the beam on his own, and soon it will be too late for Ponzi. He needed to get out immediately. The flaming catapult was only about 30 steps away, yet Uncle Louis felt very weak, and the pain in his chest was worrisome. "I can't die yet," he told himself. At that moment, Zahir looked over at him with a desperate, pleading glance, and then he ran in to help the trapped Tiny. On the other side of the glass, in the Paradise Room, the professor and Evan had been horrified that no one was stepping forward to save Ponzi. All their systems were operating well, and the Tinies were getting the fire under control, but there was nothing the scientists could do to help the flailing captive. They could see that Louis was incapacitated, and they were thankful Zahir had insisted he rest. But they knew that unless some of the Tinies took compassion on Ponzi, he was doomed. Sweating profusely, the professor was hoping beyond hope the mischievous Tiny would be rescued. "Odin and Ponzi, offer your help," he commanded angrily, even though he knew they couldn't hear. "Sat allures, you started this. Come on, Odin. You likely could lift that beam all by yourself. Get in there. Help your friend." "Come on, Odin," Evan echoed. But Odin and France were still intent on finding a way to break through the tunnel. Had there not been so much noise with the crackling fire, the rainmaker, the terrified animals, and vocal Tinies, perhaps some of the Tinies would have heard the commotion outside the dome. When the professor and Evan saw Zahir dash in, their anxiety grew. "Seth lowers, he may not be strong enough," Jax cried out. "Help him! Come on, someone needs to help him!" Trembling inside the dome, Louis was praying with his eyes open. Words came to mind that he had read in Matthew. "Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." "Lord, this goes far beyond servant leadership," he acknowledged fearfully. "But I can't let Zahir and Ponzi down." Pushing himself up, he begged, "Jesus, help me to follow you. Please give me the strength. Father, if we die, I pray our lives may be in your hands. I pray the others may find truth. You are the only hope I have." Horrified, the professor and Evan watched Louis stumble forward. "Oh la la, not Louis," Jax called out in terror. "You aren't well enough. This is way too dangerous for you." "Then who?" Evan called out. "Someone has to help Zahir." Terrified, Jax Lamans pleaded, "Not my son. Not my aging son. Anyone but Louis." Fearfully, he exclaimed, "Salors, what if we lose all three?" Louis forced himself toward the burning catapult, Zahir and Ponzi. The swarthy young man pulled on the non-blazing end with all his might, and the beam budged a little. He heaved again, moving it a little further, but he wasn't quite strong enough. Flames were leaping all around him and Ponzi. Evan felt hopelessly powerless as he watched the intensely dangerous mission. He saw Uncle Louis reach the beam and try to help. "You can do it, guys. You can do it," he encouraged from behind the glass. But he was also worried they might lose all three. Georgia was calling out in terror, begging Zahir to get out of the dangerous fire immediately. Santa was shouting for Amy to grab the next pot. Terrified by the drama, Amy tried to keep up her part in the brigade. Pot after pot was passed up the line as she watched Zahir and Uncle Louis drag the blazing beam off Ponzi's back. Procuring another pot, Lima bravely endured the heat to dash water against Ponzi, squelching the fire that had taken hold of his clothes. With no time to lose, the tall black youth sprinted back to the brigade. Only by then, the spreading flames had also reached one courageous young rescuer. "Zahir!" Uncle Louis shouted. "You're on fire!" Zahir looked down and saw that tongues of fire were leaping up his leg. Panicking, he tried to run, but tripped and fell. Georgia jumped up and down, screaming with all her might. Amy dropped a pot of water, paralyzed by fear. "Roll!" Uncle Louis yelled. "Suffocate the flames!" Quickly returning to the scene, Lima doused Zahir as he rolled away from the heat. Uncle Louis collapsed on Zahir, trying to put out the fire in his hair. Damien and Franz threw water on them both, finally extinguishing the brutal flames. Exhausted, Uncle Louis was gasping for breath. He couldn't move. Zahir and Ponzi lay on the blackened terrain, writhing in agony with severe burns, but finally out of immediate danger. The rainmaker passed over, drenching their bodies. The catapult was no longer on fire, but a new flare-up had engulfed a group of firs which stood close to the biggest pile of dead branches. "Fight the fire, everyone!" Damien commanded with a loud, domineering voice. "We can't give up now!" Amy longed to run to the 3 injured men, but she realized if they didn't stop the blaze, the situation would get even worse. Fearful for their lives, the Tinies gave every last bit of strength and speed to bring water to the blazing evergreens. Even Franz and Odin gave up on their plans to break free and fought hard. In the kitchen, Nancy, Kenzie, and Vahid carried on, rapidly filling the pots, running back and forth, handing them to Vanitha and Georgia. One by one, the Tinies quickly passed the precious liquid all the way up the line. Lily broke rank and ran to Ponzi, but she had been in such hysterics that she hadn't been helping much anyway. Charlie and Milan were at the front line, passing pots to the Beach Boys, who continued to defy the dreadful heat in order to hurl water against the flames. Inside the Paradise Room, the professor and Evan were relieved that Ponzi had been rescued, but horrified over the dangerous situation that now threatened 3 lives. Louis seemed to be suffering a heart attack, while Zahir and Ponzi were reacting to major burns. On the phone to Farouk, Jax begged for help and advice. Evan called Rachel, urging her to come immediately as he ran to the supply room to load the train with the stretcher and supplies. Streams of water from the fountains behind the forest finally began to reach the hottest spot, quenching the inferno at its base. After a long 5 minutes, with the steady supply of water pots, the constant outpouring from the rainmaker and fountains, the fire finally died out. The frontline workers collapsed on the ground, worn out from the ordeal. Some were only now feeling the singes on their limbs. A large section of the forest had been decimated and lay in blackened ruins. Uncle Louis wanted to get up and see who was hurt and who needed help, but he couldn't rise. His heart was thumping wildly. He could hardly breathe. Pain shot down his left arm. From the nearby air jets, the breeze intensified. Cool air blew over everyone, pushing the smoke away and bringing in much-needed oxygen. Rain poured down once again as it passed overhead. Turning his head sideways, Uncle Louis saw Amy and Tina rushing toward them with the first aid kits. Georgia and Kenzie followed close behind. He knew that the 2 young men beside him needed immediate attention and others had minor burns, but he was unable to do anything about it. Breathing a prayer of thanks that all the lives had been spared, Uncle Louis closed his eyes and blacked out. I would like to express my thanks to Beth and Ben Abak for the song recordings in this book. This series of novels can be ordered on Amazon. Treasure in Paradise is the final story in the trilogy. Pictures, footnotes, and references are included in the hard copy. If you've enjoyed this tale, you may enjoy others by Tikvah. Goodbye, and thank you.